Good morning. It's so good to see you guys today. I got to tell you, it's mornings like this, it's the most intimidating time to preach. Did you know that? Because it's cold outside and you came anyway. My goodness, I better not disappoint. But here's the good thing. God's word is good. And today we're going to dive into our second week in this New Testament letter of 1 Thessalonians. And there's stuff in here, oh my goodness, it has been encouraging to me, it's been challenging to me, and I think that what we're gonna talk about is gonna be encouraging to you and the good kind of challenging for you as well. I wanna welcome those of you who are joining us online. We're glad that you get to be a part of this. This is how I wanna get started. Can we get started with a question? You guys know I like to ask questions. If you could edit one thing about the leader of your whatever, what would it be? Or just, I don't know, think about all the areas in life that you have a leader that you have to follow. What is one thing, if you could edit one thing, what would make that leader better? Just think about that. Just, if there's one thing you could tweak, there's one thing that you could change, one thing that you could edit, maybe not only would it make that leader better, but because you're following them, it would make you better. And some of you probably are thinking, you know, some leaders we pick, some leaders we don't pick. You might be thinking about a leader right now that you just feel stuck with. But regardless of how you came under the influence of that particular leader, what is something that could make them better? And as you're thinking about this, you might be thinking about a leader on the national level. You might be thinking about a leader on the community level. You might be thinking about a church leader. I gotta tell you, there's more than one item on the list of things that I wanna edit about me. We can compare notes after service. See me in the lobby. Maybe you're thinking about a leader at work. Maybe you're thinking about a leader in your home. Maybe you're thinking about a leader in your volunteer organization that you're a part of. But let's do this. Let's just don't look out. Let's make sure we turn the spotlight on ourselves, because you know this, right? Every single one of us, every single one of you, you're leading something, you're leading somebody. You know that, right? We're all leaders. And some of you lead on kind of in a professional sphere, and you are actually shaping the careers of other people are influenced by your leadership. Some of you are leading on a much more intimate level. There are miniature humans whose lives are being shaped by your leadership. If you're struggling to kind of connect the dots and answer the question, what is it that you're leading? Who is it that you're leading? Would you think about it this way? Aren't all of us responsible for leading ourselves well? How are you doing at leading you? Here's a quick reality check. Maybe the leader that you want to edit the most is you. Maybe the leader that I want to edit the most is me. Do you remember our series thesis? This is what we're saying throughout the series through 1 Thessalonians. Holiness is more than God having all of you. It means he's expanding you. And so if you were here last week, or if you get to watch online last week, I hope you've been thinking about how you want to grow, how you want to mature, how maybe you want to be stretched, how you want Jesus to expand you. And this idea is based on what we've identified as the thesis statement of 1 Thessalonians. It comes from chapter 3. May the Lord make your love increase and overflow for each other and for everyone else, just as ours does for you. May he strengthen your hearts so that you will be blameless and holy in the presence of our God and Father when our Lord Jesus comes with all his holy ones. This right here, this is the goal. This is the target, to be holy. And if you are a follower of Jesus, when you become a follower of Jesus, he makes you holy. And we experience holiness in two ways. There are two distinct aspects of what it means to be holy, and they're distinct from each other, vitally important. The first way that we experience it is a word that we call justification. And what this means is when we trust in Jesus, we are given Jesus' status of holy and blameless. When we come to him in faith, when we trust in him, God sees us as without fault. God sees us as righteous. God sees us as holy, not because of anything we've done, but because of what Jesus did for us. It's a gift. But growing into that status change is what we call sanctification. As we follow Jesus, as we become more like him, we grow in holiness. We grow in blamelessness. The first one, justification, there's nothing that we can do to contribute to it. There's nothing we can do to earn it. There's nothing we can do to achieve it. It is a gift from God to us that we receive by faith, by putting our trust in, by giving our allegiance to Jesus. Sanctification, that is something we can contribute to, something we must contribute to. The process of maturing, growing, being stretched, being expanded into Christ's likeness requires our participation. And as the process of sanctification, growing, maturing plays out, it always looks like this. Our love increasing and overflowing for each other and for everyone else. So let me ask, who do you think's exempt from this list? Who's not included in each other and everyone else? That covers like all humans, right? That covers everybody. So let me ask this question. Is there anybody who just requires a little bit more effort for you to love? Is there anybody or any group of people that you'll do it, but you're not excited about loving them? Is there anybody, if you saw them at Chick-fil-A and they spilt their milkshake all the way down the front of their shirt, you'd help them clean it up, but on the inside, you're like, yes, right? Come on, be real with me. Just keep it real. Jesus is watching. Is there anybody, or is there a group of people that you've rationalized your way into or excused your way into being less patient with, less gentle with, less understanding of, less of a servant toward, a little bit more gossipy about? Anytime, whenever, wherever your life intersects with that person or those people, that is exactly where Jesus means to expand you, to grow you. And today we're going to talk about leaders. Today we're going to talk about leadership, but first let's make sure that we turn the spotlight on ourselves and we ask the question, how are we doing at leading ourselves and trusting and following Jesus in this way? Because growing in holiness, growing in blamelessness, growing in Christ's likeness always looks like our love increasing and overflowing for each other and everyone else. So is it okay if I ask, how's your love doing? Is it increasing? Does it feel like it's increasing? Does it feel like is it overflowing? Does it feel like it's just bubbling over for each other and everybody else? I want you to think about that as I get ready to read a section from 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. And as I read this, I want you to have your full mind engaged. Don't be passive, be active as we read. But I want you to do this. Do not give yourself permission to edit your emotions as I read. I want you to listen with your full mind and with your full heart. What is it that you feel as I read these things? Because this is not academic. This is not abstract. This is intimate. This is personal. As we're going to peer into how the Apostle Paul is putting into practice, he's imitating Jesus in the way that he leads, and he describes it for us. He writes this: we were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else, even though as apostles of Christ, we could have asserted our authority. Instead, we were like young children among you. Just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. Surely you remember, brothers and sisters, our toil, our hardship. We worked night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preached the gospel of God to you. You were witnesses, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed. For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God who calls you into his kingdom and glory. Last week, one of the things that we highlighted out of 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 was this: our spiritual maturity will never outpace our emotional maturity. Our spiritual maturity will never outpace our emotional maturity. And what we just read from the Apostle Paul is a high level and off the charts level of emotional maturity. And what I want to ask you today is, How's your emotional maturity? And as you're thinking about that, some of us might say, I'm not even sure how to begin to evaluate that. Maybe today will be helpful in that process. Would you be surprised to know that many, maybe the majority, but would you be surprised to know that many of the top leadership experts in the business world today are committed followers of Jesus? And the reason that they're so successful, the reason they're so sought after, is because they're simply taking the implications of the gospel and applying it to how they interact with people in the workspace. Now, there are many leadership experts who are not followers of Jesus, and yet they are really beginning to take Jesus seriously because what they're discovering through their research fits hand in glove with what we read in the gospel. It's evidence of God's fingerprints on the fabric of life and reality. Believe it or not, there's research that says growing in this right here results in you making more money at work. Let me ask you this. There are people in the workspace who have high IQs. We're talking about the really smart people with high IQs. What do you think? People who are the smartest, what percentage of the time do they outperform their colleagues? You can write your answer down. You can even whisper it to somebody next to you. What percentage of the time do you think the people with the highest IQs outperform everybody else? What do you think? 20%. 20% of the time. Now check this out. People with lower IQs, but with higher levels of emotional maturity, outperform and out-earn their colleagues over 70% of the time. Now, if this feels a little crass to talk about this connected to money, think about it this way. We are hardwired to value emotional maturity because we were made for connectedness. Again, it's evidence of God's fingerprints on the full spectrum of life and reality. Now, those are just a couple of reasons that I think are good enough for us to take this seriously, and yet, those would be secondary motivations, wouldn't they? The deep down, bedrock level motivation for taking this seriously because this reflects who God is and what he is like. And we were made in his image. And what that means is we were made to reflect him. So growing in this means growing in Christ likeness. It means reflecting who he is. As a matter of fact, there is no Christ likeness without this right here. This is a part of what it means to grow in holiness. So let's look again and let's dive into some of the things that the Apostle Paul has to say about leadership. And I want to ask, are you open for this? Are you open to be grown and stretched and expanded to greater emotional maturity so that we can be more like Jesus? Apostle Paul wrote this: "We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else, even though as apostles of Christ, we could have asserted our authority. Instead, we were like young children among you." I want you to focus on this. We were not looking for praise from people. When the story you tell yourself about yourself is that you're fully forgiven, fully loved, fully accepted, fully approved of by Jesus, you don't need praise from people to validate you. You don't need approval from people to feel like you're enough. But it still feels good, don't it? It feels great when people affirm us, when they agree with us, when they validate us. It is a drug. Approval is a drug that many of us are addicted to. So how does someone get to the point where they can appreciate this, praise from people for what it is, and not need it? Like, how can you love and serve and give yourself to people even if they don't validate you or approve you? There's got to be an internal wrestling match going on inside of us. We got to wrestle down. Where does our significance come from and what makes it secure? Last week, we drew this out of chapter 1 that idolatry is this: anything or anyone other than Jesus Christ that we look to for ultimate significance, security, and satisfaction. Of when we love and we give ourselves towards people and we serve and we try to lead and we're trying to get this from them, it will eat you alive. I want you to hear me on this. If you try to give yourself to a cause greater than yourself, if you try to love people, if you try to serve, if you try to lead and you need this from them, there will be a bitter cancer that infects your ability to love people. And here's why I say that. because we would be using them to try to meet a deep down need that they cannot fill. Remember that love means serving, investing, giving ourselves to the best interest of the other. It is not a transaction. And if we're trying to get this from people, we're going to find that we're using the techniques of love to really serve ourselves instead of serving what they need. So what's the solution? The solution is to wrestle down what's going on inside of here, to get honest about what's happening in our hearts. One of the things I want you to see today is this: leadership isn't a position, it's a disposition. Leadership isn't a position, it's a disposition. Leadership is not primarily about a position you occupy. It's about something that occupies your heart. And what we're talking about today, I'm convinced, is for everybody in this room, for everybody who's watching online. Do you see yourself as a leader? I know many of you know who Charles Spurgeon is. He was a beloved pastor from the 1800s in England, and even though he's been gone for a long time, his words still carry quite a bit of weight with many people. Of the many things he's remembered for saying, one of them is this: every Christian here is either a missionary or an imposter. That is leadership language. And if you're struggling to connect the dots, think about it like this: if you ever want to use your influence to serve the good of somebody else, that's leadership. If you ever want to use your influence to help somebody take a step towards Jesus, that's leadership. If you ever want to use your influence to help somebody take their next step with Jesus and to grow, that's leadership. And when you think about it like that, we see leadership is a destination of discipleship. Following Jesus leads to leadership. There are 532 people in this church who are actively serving on a team. And if I'm talking about you, maybe you haven't even put it together in this way, but you have embraced the call to leadership. This is a church full of leaders. Following Jesus will always lead to leadership. If you are a follower of Jesus, you're on your way, or you are a leader. Do you see yourself as a leader? You owe it to you to see yourself in that regard. And if you're saying, Rick, I don't know, I don't see myself as a leader. Maybe, I don't know, but maybe somewhere in your past, it's been misdefined for you, or it hasn't been modeled well for you. And what I want to ask is, would you let the words of the Apostle Paul reshape and reframe how you think about what leadership is? Paul says this: we were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else, even though as apostles of Christ, we could have asserted our authority. Instead, we were like young children. What? Like young children? What does that have to do with leadership? Remember in our Christmas message series, we talked a lot about coming to Jesus as a child. And we learned that what that means is embracing a position of, or a disposition of humility and vulnerability. From the vantage point of the gospel, leadership begins with humility and vulnerability. Humility and vulnerability. That's exactly what that means. That's exactly what he's talking about when he says we were like young children. And out of this foundation, this is the necessary precondition for leadership. This is the foundation. Humility and vulnerability. These are the qualities of leadership that spring up. Gentle, generous, transparent, inspiring. Gentle, generous, transparent, and inspiring. You cannot have these, not in the way that the Apostle Paul talks about, not in a gospel understanding way, without humility and vulnerability. So let's start with gentleness. The Apostle Paul wrote, just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you because we loved you so much. We were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. All right, guys, there's an aspect of leadership that we're not going to get that quickly. It's not going to come naturally to us. It probably comes more naturally to women than it does to us. Doesn't mean that we can't learn it. Doesn't mean that we can't do it. Doesn't mean we can't be expanded into Christ's likeness in this way, but we're just not going to naturally drift into it. It's something that moms kind of get. And what the Apostle Paul is writing about is something that a lot of moms already know. Gentle leaders use their strength to make our vulnerability safe. Gentle leaders use their strength to make our vulnerability safe. Is there any better expression of this, of strength meeting vulnerability, than a nursing mom? Now I get it. This would be the worst example of mansplaining ever if I tried to talk to you about what it's like to be a nursing mom. I don't know. So I decided I want to do some research, go online, and then I got a little nervous about what might show up in my search history. So I asked my executive assistant, who is a mom, if she would go and talk to moms for me, and she compiled their anonymous stories for me. And what I read was joy. I read stories about intimacy and connection. It was really beautiful. I also read about discomfort and pain, of sleeplessness and convenience. There were more than a few stories about teeth. But that's leadership, isn't it? To give yourself sacrificially for the good of someone else, and they bite you back. But that's what leaders do. That's what leadership is. Leaders, gospel leaders, voluntarily, sacrificially give themselves over to the needs and the benefits of someone else, knowing full well that those people are going to inflict pain on them in return. And they do it anyway. That's the gospel. Isn't that why? Isn't that why we're so captivated by Jesus? On a cold morning that we're happy to gather together and sing songs to celebrate him? Because that's the way that he loved us, that he voluntarily embraced pain for our benefit. Lecrae is a rapper. I can tell you were a Lecrae kind of crowd. He's one of the top artist that shows up on my Spotify playlist. But what you should know is he is a serious-minded man of faith who does a great job of connecting the gospel to everyday life. And one of the things that he said that I appreciate is this: live like someone died for you. And there is a direct correlation to my failure to be gentle with my failure to remember this. So let me ask, how gentle do you want to be? How gentle of a church do you think we ought to be? What do you think? Should we aim at being the nursing mom kind of gentle? Surely you remember, brothers and sisters, our toil and hardship. We worked night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preach the gospel of God to you. And I want to marry this to something that Paul wrote earlier when he said we could have asserted our authority as apostles. And what he was talking about is we could have claimed the right to be paid by you for the work that we did for you. Numerous times throughout the New Testament, the Apostle Paul makes clear that it's appropriate, it's a good thing to pay the people who lead and work to serve the church, people like pastors. And yet Paul is a guy who never accepted payment. Why not? Well, Paul had a habit of planting churches in cities that were violently hostile to the gospel. Now that means the very first people who joined the church, who were members of the church, partners in ministry, they were in a very vulnerable position. And if you were here last week or if you watched last week, you know that Thessalonica in the first century was a city that was sometimes just very dangerous for believers. And I don't know exactly, but I think the reason that Paul didn't accept payment is because he understood the vulnerable position that they were in, and he wanted to make clear beyond the shadow of a doubt that he wanted something for them, not something from them. And because he was trying to make clear he wanted something for them, not from them, he embraced a disposition of extreme generosity that at times was incredibly painful for him. Now, this is what we learn about leadership. Generous leaders don't just give us what we need, they give up what they need. He gave up the financial security that he needed. He gave up the rest that he needed. He gave up the sleep that he needed. He gave up the comfort that he needed so he could work long days and into the night to not be a burden on them at all. For no other reason than I think this, to demonstrate with stunning clarity, with no room for doubt, I want something for you, not from you. And so let's put the spotlight on ourselves. Let's ask ourselves this question. In your sphere of influence, and you have a sphere of influence where you lead, what's it like to be on the other side of you? What's it like to be on the other side of me? Do we cause people to feel like we want something for them? Or do we cause people to feel like we want something from them? And this is one of those questions that we can't answer ourselves. We have to make it safe for other people to answer that question. We have to ask them and then listen to what they say. Have you ever asked somebody, what's it like to be on the other side of me? What's it like to experience me? And this sets us up to the next expression of leadership that Paul talks about. He says, you are witnesses, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed. Let's connect this to the previous verse that we just read, and let's remember, he said, surely you remember. And what the Apostle Paul is doing is saying, listen, evaluate me. Look at me. Take my life seriously. Does what I say match what I do? He's giving them permission to evaluate him. And if you're going to lead, if you're going to serve, if you're going to give yourself to something bigger than yourself, you're going to be misunderstood. Count on it. It's going to happen. And what the Apostle Paul is modeling for us is this, transparency. Transparent leaders invite scrutiny. They don't just acknowledge it as a fact, they invite it. And if you're a leader, if you love people, if you want to serve people, if you're committed to joining Jesus and giving yourself to something that's bigger than yourself, the cause of his kingdom, would you do this? Would you invite scrutiny by treating questions like a gift? When people ask you questions, even if they feel contentious, they are inviting you, they're giving you permission to have influence with them. When people ask questions, and even if you don't like the way that it feels, what they're doing is they're giving you an opportunity to raise the level of clarity. And instead of just making an assumption about you and moving on, they've asked you a question. Treat it like a gift. And treat the question asker like a gift giver. Now let's flip it around. It's healthy. It's the right thing to do to scrutinize the leaders that we have in our lives. Even if they don't ask for it, it's healthy to do. But there's a couple of different ways we can do it. There is questioning someone versus asking questions of someone. Do you know the difference between those two? Questioning someone is assuming a negative and asking questions in order to confirm your suspicions. Whatever that is, that's not love. But asking questions of someone, that should be motivated. Here's how it's motivated by love. It's all about understanding them. And as we scrutinize leaders in our lives, as we watch them to see, does what they say line up with what they do, as we think about the answers that they give us, we have to be critical. But there's two kinds of critical. There's the kind of critical that means thinking seriously, and there's the kind of critical that means thinking cynically. Let's be the serious kind. Let's be the serious kind of critical. Are we trying to understand or are we trying to judge? Paul goes on, for you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, urging you to live lives worthy of God who calls you into his kingdom and glory. Ladies, there's an aspect of leadership that's probably going to come easier to a lot of guys than it's going to come to you. It just comes a little bit more naturally to them. Doesn't mean you can't learn it. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Doesn't mean you can't be expanded by Jesus into being this kind of leader. But what Paul is writing about is something that a lot of dads already know, and that's this. Inspiring leaders disrupt our complacency. Let's look at how they do that. You know what a good leader does? A good leader puts guts into us. A good leader puts bravery into us. A good leader, like a good dad, loans us their courage when they know we don't have enough to face whatever it is that's in front of us. I'm with you. You can do this. A good leader also gives us comfort. A good leader knows how to provide comfort even when they can't make the situation more comfortable, even when they can't make the challenge in front of you more comfortable. A good leader, like a good dad, knows how to help us become comfortable in the middle of discomfort. And a good leader puts wind in our sails. A good leader, like a good dad, knows how to motivate and inspire and draw us to give ourselves to something that's bigger than ourselves. And the best leaders, just like a good and loving dad, lead us to give ourselves to the God who calls us to himself and to serve his purposes. Inspiring leaders disrupt our complacency. These are the qualities of leadership: gentle, generous, transparent, and inspiring. I don't know how much you know about the life of the man that we know as the Apostle Paul. Historians of all stripes, whether they're religious or irreligious, widely consider him to be one of the top 20 most influential people in all of human history. When he was alive, he would have been in the top 1% of the most educated people on the planet. He probably had an IQ that was off the charts. He was elite. He was powerful. And before he became a follower of Jesus, he was brutal. He was comfortable with physically wounding, beating, imprisoning, and even killing people who he thought was wrong. Now, his life was instantly and radically changed by an encounter with Jesus sometime after the resurrection. And in that encounter, Jesus immediately gave him a call to ministry. And shortly after that, Paul began to preach a handful of times. But then he went into a 3-year period of relative seclusion. And it would be about a total of 14 or 15 years before his ministry took off. And my question is, why? Why did it take this guy who was so brilliant, so powerful, so elite? Why was he on the bench for so long? Why did it take so long for Jesus to put him in the starting lineup? I don't know. I'm pretty sure that it's not that he wasn't smart enough to understand the gospel and teach it in a way that people could understand. It wasn't an education issue. It was not an IQ issue. I can't help but wonder, was it an EQ issue? Was it his emotional maturity and emotional intelligence? Did it take that long to become the kind of guy who could model Christ's likeness relationally and emotionally? Describing what Jesus has done for you in your life comes quick. You can do that instantaneously. Demonstrating what Jesus has done for you and demonstrating Jesus' likeness, that probably takes some time. And maybe it took that amount of time for him to grow in emotional maturity. So I want to ask, would you be willing to do this? Would you be willing to follow Jesus into emotional maturity so that you can lead from a place of emotional maturity? Would you see this as part of what it means to be holy, of part of what it means to be expanded and stretched and grown by Jesus into Christ likeness? I bet there are a lot of you. Your story would be similar to mine. The reason that you're captivated by Jesus, the reason that you are so enthralled by him and you've given your life to him and you want to follow him is because you have experienced his kindness, his gentleness, his grace, and his goodness. What could keep us from wanting to be that way with other people? And if there's anyone here, you're not a follower of Jesus. You've been getting your questions answered. You've had some doubts, you've had some questions, and you've been evaluating. Let me ask you, what could keep you from trusting someone who would love you this way, who would hurt so that he could love you? Would you trust in him? For all of us, would you be willing to follow Jesus into emotional maturity so that you can lead and serve and give yourself from a place of emotional maturity? Will you pray with me?